The restaurant was painted in gold and silver light, its glass walls reflecting the shimmer of a city that never truly slept. Outside, cameras flashed like restless lightning, but inside, beneath that soft chandelier glow, time seemed to hang heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Xiao Zhan sat quietly, his smile perfectly composed as though he was carved from calm. But his heart was far from it. His fingers trembled slightly under the linen tablecloth, tracing invisible patterns as if they could distract him from the tension building between him and the man sitting opposite him, Wang Yibo. It was supposed to be a private dinner, a simple get-together after months of distance and headlines that never stopped spinning their names together. The restaurant had been cleared, every table reserved under a single name, Yibo's. Yet, despite all the careful planning, the air between them was sharper than the edge of a broken mirror. The waiter poured red wine into their glasses, the liquid swirling like blood under candlelight. Xiao Zhan forced a small laugh, one that trembled like his pulse. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Yibo didn't look up. He was scrolling through his phone, the faint glow of the screen casting a cold light across his flawless face. His jaw tightened as he murmured, "Yeah, a while." Those two words hit like frost. Xiao Zhan swallowed hard, the taste of silence burning his tongue. He wanted to ask why Yibo seemed so distant, why his eyes, once warm and teasing, now carried a chill that cut deeper than anger. But before he could speak, a familiar voice came from the entrance. "Yibo." It was their producer, Lu Ming, grinning broadly as he approached. Behind him trailed a few industry elites, faces Xiao Zhan had seen at award shows and after-parties. Yibo stood immediately, his phone sliding into his pocket as he greeted them with a warm smile. Xiao Zhan froze. That smile, it wasn't the one Yibo used with him. It was polite, effortless, perfectly public, the kind that built walls higher than any apology could climb. "Ah, and Xiao Zhan," the producer said cheerfully, "long time. You two haven't been seen together much lately." The table's energy shifted. The laughter dimmed. All eyes turned toward them. Xiao Zhan smiled faintly, hoping Yibo would join him in diffusing the tension like they always used to when they were a team, a secret alliance against the world. But Yibo's gaze flicked toward him and then away. He took a sip of his wine and said casually, "We're just colleagues now. We don't really talk outside of work." The words were soft, but they echoed like a gunshot across the table. Xiao Zhan's fingers tightened around his glass. The tremor in his hands was impossible to hide. He forced a quiet laugh, trying to make it sound natural, but it cracked halfway through. "Colleagues." That single word stabbed deeper than betrayal. It stripped away years of trust, of late-night conversations, of the kind of quiet friendship that only those who've suffered together could understand. Everyone else laughed awkwardly, unsure what to make of the sudden tension. Yibo, cool and unbothered, turned his attention to a new guest who had just arrived, a glamorous actress known for her flawless charm. He pulled out a chair for her, his voice smooth, his expression easy, and Xiao Zhan just sat there, staring at the man he once thought would always see him. The rest of the evening passed in slow motion. Every laugh Yibo shared, every casual gesture, every glance that deliberately avoided meeting Xiao Zhan's. Each one felt like a deliberate cut. Xiao Zhan excused himself midway through dinner, claiming he needed a moment of air. Outside, the night wind hit his face like glass. He gripped the railing overlooking the city, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that hurt. He remembered a time when Yibo had stood beside him in moments like this, when the world had turned too cruel and only their quiet understanding had kept them steady. Now, Yibo was inside, surrounded by people and pretending that Xiao Zhan was just another name in the industry. Inside the restaurant, Yibo sat still after Xiao Zhan left. For a moment, his smile faded. His fingers tapped rhythmically against his glass, the faintest hint of unease shadowing his face. He heard the laughter of his companions, the clinking of glasses, but it all sounded far away. The actress beside him leaned closer. "You were a bit harsh," she whispered, smirking. "Didn't think you two were just colleagues." Yibo's jaw flexed. "We're not anything else." But his eyes flicked toward the door where Xiao Zhan had exited moments earlier. His throat tightened, and for a fleeting second, the mask slipped. Outside, Xiao Zhan leaned against his car, staring at the reflection of the restaurant's glowing lights. He could see silhouettes moving inside, Yibo's among them. Every movement felt like a reminder of distance, of how easily someone could turn away and call it professionalism. He had known Yibo's silence before. It was part of his mystery, part of what made him magnetic, but this was different. This silence was deliberate. It wasn't absence, it was denial. When Xiao Zhan finally drove away, his heart felt heavier than his body. The city lights blurred as tears gathered in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Not tonight. Not for someone who had just erased him in front of a crowd. Meanwhile, Yibo sat in the restaurant long after the guests had gone. The laughter had faded, the wine glasses were half empty, and the chandeliers flickered faintly. He stared at the seat Xiao Zhan had occupied. A faint trace of perfume lingered in the air, familiar, haunting. He reached out, as if to touch the space between them, but his hand froze midair. The memory of Xiao Zhan's quiet smile flashed through his mind, the one that always said, "I understand, even when you don't speak." Yibo closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He told himself it was better this way. That distance was safer. That denying what they were, or what they could have been, was the only way to survive the chaos surrounding them. But as he sat there, surrounded by luxury and emptiness, he realized something that clawed at his chest. You can deny someone with words, but you can't silence what's written in your heart. Days later, the tabloids spun their own stories. Photos of that night flooded the internet. Yibo laughing with the actress, Xiao Zhan leaving the restaurant alone, his expression unreadable. Headlines screamed cold shoulder at dinner, and the rift deepens. Neither man spoke publicly. But those who looked closely, those who had watched them on screen, who knew the glances and half-smiles that once spoke louder than dialogue, knew the truth. There was more to the story than the headlines could print. Behind the denial, behind the silence, was a connection that refused to disappear. Weeks later, at a different event, they met again. The room was filled with cameras, laughter, and noise, but when their eyes met, everything else faded. Xiao Zhan's gaze was calm, steady, almost unreadable. But deep inside, Yibo could see the ache he'd caused. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the weight of his own choices held him back. He had denied Xiao Zhan once, and the world had believed it. Now, he had to live with the echo of his own lie. That night at the dinner table would haunt him for years to come, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. The restaurant had emptied, but the echoes of what Wang Yibo said still hung in the air like ghostly whispers that refused to die. "We're just colleagues now." Those 4 words had pierced Xiao Zhan like a blade dipped in silence. As he stood outside, the cool night air brushing against his face, Xiao Zhan's reflection in the car window looked like a stranger. The city lights blurred behind him, glittering like broken promises. He pressed his hand against the glass, as though he could steady his trembling heart. Inside, through the tinted windows, he could still see Yibo, smiling, chatting, pretending. That same man who once laughed uncontrollably beside him during midnight rehearsals now looked like he had erased every trace of what they used to share. Yet Xiao Zhan knew Yibo too well. He saw the small flicker in Yibo's eyes when their gazes met earlier, a flash of guilt quickly buried beneath that perfect composure. But the world would never see that. Moments later, Xiao Zhan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Yibo. "Don't take it personally. It's better this way." He stared at the screen, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Better this way? Was it better to pretend they were strangers? Better to slice through years of trust just to maintain an image? His heart screamed no, but he typed nothing back. He slipped his phone into his pocket, climbed into his car, and drove off, leaving behind the glittering restaurant that had witnessed the quiet breaking of something beautiful. Meanwhile, inside, Yibo sat motionless after sending the message. The laughter around him faded as the actress beside him touched his arm lightly. "You seem tense tonight, Yibo. Everything okay?" He forced a small smile. "Just tired." But his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't tired. he was torn. His mind replayed Xiao Zhan's quiet face across the table. That look of disbelief when he said colleagues. He hadn't planned those words. They had slipped out, raw and defensive, like a shield against something too dangerous to name. Yibo's heart was pounding, but he masked it with another sip of wine. The burn of it wasn't enough to drown the ache inside. Later, when the night had grown older and the guests finally left, Yibo sat alone at the same table where Xiao Zhan once sat. The empty chair across from him seemed to whisper the truth he was too afraid to admit, that denial was easier than vulnerability, that pretending was safer than caring. He reached for the glass Xiao Zhan had left untouched. The faint imprint of his lips still lingered on the rim. Yibo's thumb brushed against it, and suddenly, memories came crashing down. The sound of Xiao Zhan's laughter in rehearsals, the way he always stayed behind to help clean up, the gentle way he'd say, "You overthink too much, Yibo." He clenched his jaw and looked away. Outside, the sky had turned darker, almost ink-like. The city's glow dimmed, and for the first time in years, Yibo felt small. Like all his fame, all his composure couldn't protect him from his own heart. Days turned into nights, but the memory of that dinner wouldn't fade. The media had feasted on it, tabloids painting pictures of rivalry, betrayal, and distance. Fans speculated endlessly, dissecting every photo, every expression. But what no one knew was that both men were haunted by the same night for entirely different reasons. For Xiao Zhan, it was the night he realized that sometimes love doesn't end in a fight, it ends in silence. For Yibo, it was the night he learned that denial doesn't protect you, it just leaves you emptier. A week later, they crossed paths again, this time at a private industry gala. The hall was filled with laughter, chandeliers, and champagne, but the tension between them was a silent storm waiting to break. Xiao Zhan entered wearing a sleek black suit, calm and radiant as always, but his eyes carried a quiet heaviness that only Yibo could recognize. The world saw confidence, Yibo saw heartbreak. When their eyes met across the room, Yibo froze. It was just a second, but it felt endless. There were no cameras this time, no witnesses, just two souls colliding silently in a crowd. He wanted to walk up to him, to say I didn't mean it, but his feet refused to move. Every instinct told him to stay composed, to remain untouchable. Then Xiao Zhan smiled, faintly, politely, and turned away. That moment crushed Yibo more than any headline could. Because for the first time, Xiao Zhan's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was distant, professional, a mirror of the lie Yibo had built himself. Later that night, Yibo found himself outside again, staring at the same kind of city lights they had once admired together after long shoots. He remembered how Xiao Zhan used to say, "These lights look like dreams, beautiful but out of reach." Now he finally understood. He pulled out his phone again, scrolling through their old messages. Inside jokes, late-night voice notes, simple words that once felt effortless. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he couldn't bring himself to type. What could he say that would undo the pain he'd caused? Back in his apartment, Xiao Zhan sat on his balcony, the night air carrying the faint hum of the city. He wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of pretending, tired of being hurt by someone who once made him feel seen. Yet, deep down, beneath the ache, there was still something soft, an understanding that maybe Yibo's denial wasn't cruelty. Maybe it was fear. Fear of the world. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of losing everything they had built if anyone saw what truly existed between them. Still, knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. He whispered into the night, as if Yibo could somehow hear him, "You didn't have to say it that way." The wind carried the words away, scattering them across the city skyline. And somewhere, miles away, Yibo looked out his own window, whispering into the same night, "I didn't want to." They were both speaking to the same silence, separated by pride, connected by everything unspoken. The dinner table had become more than a memory. It was a scar, one carved in both their hearts. But what neither of them knew was that fate wasn't done with them yet. The same world that tore them apart was quietly weaving the next chapter of their story. where truth might finally find its way past denial. Because some connections, no matter how broken, are written too deeply to be erased. Broken Heart Sparkles, if this story touched your heart. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more mind-blowing emotional stories about Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan. Every view and comment helps bring these unforgettable tales to life. Stay tuned for the next chapter.